Medicine is incredible, but every so often a case shows up that makes even seasoned doctors do that slow blink. Like, wait, what? Not just rare, not just complicated, I mean cases where the symptoms did not fit the textbook. The cause seemed impossible, or the body did something that should not be able to happen at all. Today we're counting down 10 real medical cases that left doctors confused, argued over, or chasing answers for years. Some still do not have a clean explanation. Here is a sentence that should not be real. A patient arrives at an emergency room and the staff treating her start collapsing like dominoes. On February 19, 1994, Gloria Ramirez was brought to the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital in California. She was critically ill and staff began intense efforts to stabilize her. Then things went sideways fast. Multiple workers reported sudden symptoms, including fainting and breathing problems. Several required hospitalization. One ended up in intensive care for an extended stay. The case triggered a major investigation, including involvement from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. One leading theory proposed that Ramirez had used dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, as a home remedy. The idea was that under emergency conditions, oxygen and electrical shocks could have contributed to chemical changes that produced a toxic compound capable of affecting nearby staff. That theory was influential and cited, but it has always been debated by chemists, which is part of what keeps this case in the still argued over category. Imagine going to the doctor for something fairly ordinary and leaving with a scan that makes the room go quiet. In 2007, a short report in The Lancet described a 44-year-old man in France who showed up with mild symptoms. When doctors imaged his head, they found severe hydrocephalus, meaning cerebrospinal fluid had expanded the ventricles so dramatically that most of his brain tissue was compressed into a thin layer around the skull. If you were picturing a person who would be in a long-term care facility, unable to function, you are not alone. That is why this case became famous. The patient had lived a largely normal life and worked. Testing showed low normal cognitive performance, but not the kind of catastrophic impairment most people would expect from the scan. Doctors believed the condition likely traced back to childhood and that his brain had adapted over the years, slowly, quietly, and relentlessly rewiring itself around a structural situation that looks impossible at first glance. If you want a story that feels like a movie twist, this one is real. Terry Wallace was severely injured in a vehicle crash in 1984. After the acute phase, he spent years in what was later described as a minimally conscious state. Doctors believed meaningful recovery was essentially not going to happen. Then, in 2003, after about 19 years, he began to speak. Not gradually over months, not after a cutting-edge experimental treatment. He just started coming back. One of the first reported words was a simple recognition of his mother. The part that hits hardest is how his sense of time was off. He believed he was still living in the year of his accident. Researchers later used brain imaging to study him and suggested a possible partial explanation. Over time, surviving brain networks may have formed new connections around damaged areas. Neuroplasticity again, but on a scale that made clinicians rethink what permanent can mean in disorders of consciousness. Still, even with proposed mechanisms, the timing and degree of his return felt medically shocking. Here is a real nightmare scenario. You insist you have not had a drink, but tests say otherwise. People think you're lying, your life starts falling apart, but auto-brewery syndrome is a rare condition in which microbes in the gut ferment carbohydrates into ethanol-producing measurable alcohol in the body. Patients can appear intoxicated without consuming any alcohol. It sounds like a joke. It is not. A 2019 case report and literature review in BMJ Open Gastroenterology describes how complex diagnosis can be and how easily it can be missed. Symptoms overlap with countless other issues, and because it is rare and under-recognized, patients can spend a long time being dismissed. It is one of the most real examples of a body behaving in a way that sounds impossible until a breath test proves it is happening. Now, let's leave the hospital and go to a place where an entire community turned into a medical mystery. In Kalachi, Kazakhstan, residents began experiencing episodes where they would suddenly fall asleep for days. sometimes longer. Along with the sleep came confusion, memory issues, and hallucinations. It affected different ages, it came in waves, and for years it resisted a simple explanation. Theories ranged from environmental toxins to contaminated water to gas leaking from nearby abandoned infrastructure. Officials later attributed the episode to elevated carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons linked to an abandoned mine with reduced oxygen in the air contributing to the symptoms. Whether you treat it as solved or mostly solved, it still qualifies as one of the strangest modern medical mysteries because the symptoms looked like something out of folklore, except it happened on camera in medical records with real patients who just wanted their normal lives back. If you want a medical case that haunts neurologists, this is one of the big ones. Between roughly 1916 and 1927, an epidemic of Encephalitis lethargica swept across parts of the world. Patients could develop profound sleepiness, movement abnormalities, psychiatric changes, and in some cases, a locked-in statue-like state. Doctors at the time documented it carefully, and yet the cause remained elusive. Even now, the origin is still debated. Was it linked to influenza? Was it autoimmune? Was it triggered by an infection we still have not pinned down? Did multiple conditions get lumped under one name? Modern medical references still describe the cause as unknown. That is wild for something that affected so many people and changed so many lives. It is a reminder that medicine is not a straight line of progress. Here is a phenomenon that sounds like myth until you read the medical case reports. Hematohidrosis is described as episodes where blood appears to ooze from intact skin, sometimes mixed with sweat. It has been reported in extreme stress contexts, but also in ways that are hard to map cleanly to one simple cause. A review and case discussion in the medical literature notes how rare it is and how few reports exist, which is part of the problem. When a condition is that uncommon, the science struggles. Not enough patients, not enough consistent data, not enough opportunities to observe it in real time under controlled conditions. Proposed mechanisms exist, including ideas about fragile blood vessels around sweat glands and stress-related physiological cascades, but even the most responsible medical writing tends to circle back to the same truth. We do not fully understand how it happens. It is one of those cases where medicine can name the phenomenon, document it, and still not be able to confidently explain the why for every patient. This one is cruel in a very specific kind of way. Aquagenic urticaria is a rare condition where contact with water triggers hives. Not a chemical in the water, not a certain temperature, just water touching skin. Think about what that means. Showering, rain, swimming, sweat, even tears. Everyday life becomes a minefield. Case reports describe patients developing small wheals and redness after water exposure, and the mechanism is still not fully understood. It is often discussed as a hypersensitivity reaction involving histamine release, but why water triggers that cascade in these patients remains unclear. There are theories involving substances in the skin interacting with water or changes in the skin barrier, but it is not a neat, solved one-page explanation. Doctors can test it with a controlled water challenge and manage it with antihistamines and other strategies, but the core mystery remains. How can the most basic substance on Earth be the trigger? It is a real condition with documented cases, and it still lands in the category of we can describe it and treat it, but we do not fully understand it. Picture this. You wake up after a brain event and suddenly everyone says you sound like you're from somewhere else. Foreign accent syndrome, FAS, is rare but documented. Patients develop speech changes that listeners perceive as a foreign accent. It is not that the person learned a new accent, it is that subtle shifts in timing, stress, and articulation create a pattern that the brain of the listener recognizes as foreign. Medical literature describe it as linked to neurological damage in many cases, including stroke or brain injury, but what keeps it in the mystery zone is that it does not behave consistently across patients, and the exact neurological mechanisms are still being studied. It is also complicated by perception. The accent is partly in the ear of the listener, so even though medicine can point to likely regions and contributing factors, the experience of it remains very strange. We are ending with one that is less flashy, but honestly more horrifying if you imagine living it. Charles Osborne is often cited as the person who experienced hiccups for the longest period, from 1922 to 1990, after an accident. The exact underlying cause has been debated, with suggestions involving nervous system irritation and possible injury-related factors, but it never landed as a simple, clear, universally agreed medical explanation that could be cleanly fixed. And that is part of why this story sticks. Hiccups are usually nothing. Then you meet the extreme edge case, and suddenly you realize how fragile the body's little reflex circuit can be. One disruption and the system locks in a loop. Reports note the hiccups eventually stopped, not because medicine finally cracked the code, but because the body changed again for reasons that are still not fully understood. It's a reminder that some of the most small symptoms can be the most life-consuming medical mysteries when they refuse to follow normal rules. All right, guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!